Hi. Welcome to this special evening session of the lecture series. Tonight we have Thierry de Duve. I'm going to give just a sort of a history of him without going into, I'm not going to have the eloquence of the introduction he was given last year by one of our students, but I will tell you that he is a scholar and historian of contemporary and modern art. He's Belgian. His father was a Nobel Prize-winning cytologist and biochemist. He is coming to us today from Cal Arts, where he is currently or just finishing being the theorist in residence for their MA in Aesthetics and Politics program. And he is currently a distinguished lecturer at Hunter College in New York. Previously, he was the Kirk Varnedoe Visiting Professor at the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU, and he was also the Evans Scholar at Evergreen here last year for 3 weeks. And he is Emeritus Professor from the University of Lille. Some of the texts that he is known for include Pictorial Nominalism, Kant after Duchamp, Clement, Greenberg, Between the Lines, Look, 100 Years of Contemporary Art, Sewn in the Sweatshops of Marx, Beuys, Warhol, Klein, Duchamp. And in 1314, right as he was coming to us, he published 6 essays in Art Forum, and he's gathering those into a book. Is it still tentatively titled Duchamp's Telegram? And he's also finishing another book on essays on aesthetics that's forthcoming. I would say that he, when he was interested in coming to Evergreen, he has a slight history in sort of an experimental arts college, an interest in an experimental pedagogy, and with Jean Guillard, he co-founded the Free Institute of Fine Art in Brussels in 1972. And he's also curated the Belgian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2003. So among many, many other interesting things. So tonight he is going to give us a talk on a contemporary artist, Suzanne McClellan. So let's welcome back Thierry with love.
Waiting for the blue lights to be turned off or at least dimmed as much as possible so that we can concentrate. Fine, perfect. Thank you very much. And can this be dimmed a little bit also? Because it's so blinding. I cannot see you, but I can certainly see my text. What I'm going to present to you tonight is turn them down. Terrible. I'll have to wear a... All right. Is a result of me visiting a exhibition by Suzanne McClellan at Team Gallery in New York last February. And being so stimulated that I wanted to write on that exhibition. And then an occasion was given to me by the fact that last week in LA there has been a conference entitled When is Art Political? And so I was the keynote lecturer at that conference, and I decided to present that piece so that towards the end of the my talk, you will hear reference made to the organizers of this conference. Now you know who they are. Or who they are is Arne de Boever of CalArts Critical Studies, School of Critical Studies, and Michael Kelly, who is the editor of the Encyclopedia of Aesthetics. They were the organizers of that conference. So when I refer to the organizers, I mean them. I just cannot stand this light, and so... Pardon me. I am protected from the light. Is it... is it terrible for the camera? There's no light on my face? You have to tell me. Is it that bad? I cannot hear you. Should I keep it or not? Okay. I think I should be in the dark with a tiny... Oh, there is a lamp here. Okay, off, please. Oh, no, the camera. Oh. I don't want to be a movie star. I think you should be looking at the screen and not at me. But I understand that if you're recording it, I have to abide by those rules. Okay, let me start. And let us say you heard of the title of Suzanne McClellan's second solo show at Team Gallery in February 2015 before you saw the show. Call with Information sounds uncannily ominous right away. What puts you on the defensive, ready to expect the worst, is not just the Orwellian innuendo, it's not the imperative mode per se, it's more something like the twist on the innocuous and familiar call for information you might read under a 1-800 number. Call with information or else. Now let's say you entered the show innocently without prior knowledge of its title. The first thing you would see facing you is a wide confrontational partition papered from top to bottom with one obsessively repeated black and white poster. There are things on top of that wallpaper interfering with it. A very dark photo portrait and 5 works on paper, all black and white, but it's the posters that summon you. They reveal themselves so densely packed with text that they force you to neglect not only the works hanging on top of them, but also the large paintings on the left and right walls that beckon in your peripheral vision. Picking in the posters from a distance, first you noticed a partly illegible headline in a huge typeface at the top, then a number of dates in a somewhat smaller font, interspersed with a profusion of photos, statistical charts, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes, and finally, columns and blocks of text typeset in hardly legible font size. The overall effect is no less ominous than the show's title. Read the small print, or else. The small print and the disorderly design of the poster are rebarbative enough to make you want to turn around and seek solace in the paintings in the room. What stops you is that, amidst other visual disturbances, you caught in the corner of your eye the anomaly that had hindered smooth identification of the headline. The latter reads, "Since Oklahoma," like in oak tree. The typo that slipped an A between the O and the K has been tentatively erased with white paint and then pasted over with what seems to be a press clipping broad enough to partially obliterate the K and the L as well. Though your reading was slowed down a bit by the caesura so produced, in the end, Since Oklahoma leaves you without a doubt as to the event the headline refers to. Indeed, should you read the poster, starting in the upper left corner, you would be reminded of the following. At 9:02 a.m. on April 19, 1995, a 7,000-pound truck bomb constructed of ammonium nitrate fertilizer and nitromethane racing fuel and packed into 13 plastic barrels rips through the heart of the Alfred P. Murray Federal Building in Oklahoma City. The explosion wrecked much of downtown Oklahoma City and killed 168 people, including 19 children in a daycare center. Another 500 were injured. Although many Americans initially suspected an attack by Middle Eastern radicals, it quickly became clear that the mass murder had actually been carried out by domestic right-wing terrorists. Domestic terrorism, especially right-wing, is something Americans would prefer to ignore. The name Timothy McVeigh didn't sell tabloids the way Osama bin Laden did. McClellan's confrontational wall of posters puts you in front of a dilemma almost as soon as you have entered the gallery: to read on or to walk away. Or, for there's a third option, to turn your attention to the paintings. There are 4 in the room. At first sight, abstract expressionist in both size and handling of the paint. They don't quite offer relief from the anxiety caused by the intimation to remember Oklahoma and to read the small print on the posters. The paintings look pretty ominous too. The large one on your left throws you in the middle of an explosion, and the one on the right sucks you up in a tornado. But they are or look abstract, and as such, beg to be viewed in reassuring formalist terms. The posters, by contrast, and photography as well, are tokens of conceptual art. And current critical orthodoxy has decreed that conceptual art was, if not intrinsically political, at least sympathetic to being harnessed for political usage. In her formative years, McClellan was attentive to the work of Jenny Holzer and Barbara Kruger, who had taken stock of the linguistic and photographic turns accomplished by the first generation of conceptual artists and brilliantly made them to serve the cause of feminism. The posters bear traces of their influence. It is therefore all the more surprising to see them in the company of paintings. Indeed, the same critical orthodoxy that hails conceptual art for its criticality deems painting, especially if it borrows from the ab-ex idiom, abstract expressionist, at best benignly apolitical and at worst downright reactionary. Suzanne McClellan is mixing genres, dangerously so. Here, another wall of posters with silk screen photos on top. She deliberately pits the conceptual political look of the posters and photos against the expressionist, subjectivist, romantic look of the paintings. What exactly does she expect from the clash? She cannot expect any serious response from the serious viewer unless he or she does the effort of reading the small print on the posters. Should you do that, you would learn that no less than 112 murders, acts of sabotage, random shooting sprees, bomb attacks, and other expressions of racist violence, all qualified as hate crimes, were perpetrated between April 1995, the date of the Oklahoma City bombing, and November 2014, when the poster was readied for printing in view of McClellan's show. The perpetrators were anti-government activists, militiamen, separatist Texans, anti-tax maniacs, sovereign citizens who believe police have no right to regulate road travel, conspiracy theorists of various creeds, Ku Klux Klan members, white suprematists under such banners as forever enduring, always ready, acronym FEAR, brutal racist skinheads, and the inevitable militants of neo-Nazi groups with names such as Sons of Gestapo or the White Aryan Resistance. Most are in prison, some have done their time, many were killed or committed suicide during their action. The weapons went from sawed-off shotguns to C4 plastic explosives, from sarin nerve gas to tripwire booby traps, from Glock and Sig Sauer pistols with armor-piercing bullets to Stenmark submachine guns, AK-47s, and silenced AR-15 assault rifles, not to mention an array of homemade, often pathetic contraptions. Improvised flamethrowers, pipe bombs, grenades packed into soda cans, missiles built from model rocket engines and propane canisters, and so on. The targets were IRS buildings, energy facilities, black and Jewish landmarks, Planned Parenthood offices and abortion clinics, gay bars, the King Fahd Mosque in Culver City, California, the State Capitol building in Olympia, Washington, an Oklahoma City synagogue called the Temple B'nai Israel, or an Islamic center in Houston called the Madrasa Islamiyah. When the victims, or intended victims, were not police officers, sheriffs, or state troopers, they were overwhelmingly colored. Black immigrant workers from Capo Verde and Haiti, Mexicans in general, the African-American crowd at a Martin Luther King Day parade, and, of course, Barack Obama before and after his election. This and other chilling details you would have learned if you had read the small print on the posters. But gallery goers don't usually read, especially if it's small print. And the posters, designed by Ninse Chen under the artist's supervision, were not really meant to be read. On the premises, that is. They constitute an archive of sorts, the proof that Suzanne McClelland has done her homework, the source material that she shares with her viewers the way the author of a dissertation shares with her readers the page of acknowledgements that prefaces it. For, in truth, the exhibition is not about the terrorist attacks meticulously listed on the posters. It is about domestic terrorists still at large. The appellation domestic terrorism is a sub-rubric of the FBI's most wanted category, under which the Bureau classifies nationals considered enemies of the state. When the artist consulted the FBI website for her project, which is not, this is when I consulted it, the number is not exactly the same because of that, there were 7 domestic terrorists listed, 5 of them surprisingly female. All but one, a woman called Joanne Deborah Chezimar, who since then was moved to the most wanted terrorists sub-rubric, are still currently on the list, from which one gathers that none has yet been captured. Those 7 subjects are the subject matter, you might say, or you might as well say the object of McClelland's Call with Information show. The 4 large, apparently abstract paintings in the front room of the gallery are in fact portraits of 3 of those subjects. In parentheses, each was given a horizontal and a slightly smaller vertical canvas, so that the series comprises 14 paintings, only 4 of which were shown at Team. Chezimar's 2 portraits are in the show. The horizontal one under the title Domestic Terrorist, Shakur, NCICW 220305367, and the vertical one entitled Domestic Terrorist, Shakur, reward $2 million. Not 2,000 million. Assata Shakur is one of the many aliases under which Shazimar has been hiding since she escaped from prison in 1979. The letters NCIC stand for National Criminal Information Code, and W2203053667 is Shakur's matriculation number, referring to the kind of crimes she committed and other data. Words and numbers matter a lot to Suzanne McClelland, and she uses them in and out of paintings in a very idiosyncratic, uncommunicative, almost ritualistic way. For example, in her first show at Team Gallery in October 2013, she exhibited a group of canvases entitled Ideal Proportions, which are quote-unquote portraits of famous bodybuilders executed by way of the various measurements, waist, chest, biceps, thigh, neck circumferences, and so on, which set the standards by which jurors assess the proportions, ideal or not, of the athletes in bodybuilding contests. In one of them, the portrait of Arnold the Body, whose last name hardly needs mentioning, Californians will have recognized the likeness of their former governor. A purely conceptual likeness, however, hardly identifiable as conceptual art, which Jenny Holzer and Barbara Kruger might approve for its feminist humor, but in which they would be hard put to recognize their influence. Painted in charcoal, polymer, and oil on linen, the larger of the two canvases dedicated to Shakur feels more like landscape than portrait. A landscape with a very low horizon and an immense sky. A twister that seems to originate from an oval in the lower left part of the canvas and moves towards the right at high speed, sets the whole composition in turbulent motion. One thinks of Leonardo's drawings of storms and of Turner's rain, steam, and speed. McClelland readily embraces those associations, convinced as she is that weather conditions are the most apt metaphors for feelings, sensations, and states of mind. In the oval are inscribed, graffitied might be the better word if it existed, the letters NCIC and Shakur's matriculation number. All around the oval, other half-decipherable words are drawn with the finger in the wet paint, while toward the upper right corner, in barely legible handwriting, the phrase "scars and marks" is scribbled, or it was actually dripped in transparent medium, referring to a line on Shakur's FBI wanted poster that reads, "Scars and marks, Shazimar has scars on her chest, abdomen, left shoulder, and left knee," end of quote. None of this information can be garnered from looking at the painting, though. Or rather, some of it is there, plainly or less plainly visible, but you don't know it counts as information unless you have worked your way from the painting back to the FBI poster that is its source. And you haven't. The words and numbers in the painting, though legible, are meaningless to you. They are purely formal devices. They might as well be squares or triangles, or blobs of paint, or gratuitous Pollock-like arabesques. Or perhaps not. Once you summon Pollock as a relevant comparison to McClelland's graffitied words and numbers, it should be the Pollock of Male and Female, 1942, of which a detail here, or of Guardians of the Secret, 1943, or of Stenographic Figure, 1942. A symbolist, esoteric Pollock rather than the purely abstract Pollock of the drip period. And once you start summoning artists with whom McClellan's Shakur painting invites comparison, you're out in the wild, in a country where styles are jumbled and aesthetic affiliations are up for grabs. Proper names are prompted, certainly. La pièce, for the taped-off cross and the masonry in that part of the painting. Twombly for the scribbles. Polke for the swoop and the awkward mixture of media in the whirlpool region. Ryman for the scumbled white surface on the right. Individual works are prompted too. I already mentioned Leonardo's storm drawings. But isms and stylistic categories are not prompted. They are too general to answer the call. And formal comparisons don't tell the whole story. Although they have little in common formally, there is, in my view, conceptual, or should I say spiritual affinity between McClellan's use of numbers in the Domestic Terrorist series and Rauschenberg's use of numbers in the Lily White, an incomprehensible painting from 1950. Detail. The fact that the young Rauschenberg, then a student at Black Mountain College, did that painting in the middle of a life drawing class with his back defiantly turned on the model may not be foreign to the affinity I feel. One doesn't make portraits out of dehumanizing numbers without defiantly turning one's back on the models, especially if they are as fascinatingly repulsive as terrorists. The second room of the exhibition will reveal more affinities with Rauschenberg. But you are not done with the paintings in the first room and their contrasts to the wall of posters. You make up for the slight pang of guilt you felt for not having read the small print on the posters by granting Suzanne McClellan an aesthetic strategy more complex than it appeared at first. You struggle to reconcile her dry conceptualism in the posters with the sumptuous contempt for readability that the paintings exhibit. For you must deal with a contradiction. There's a wall of small print containing too much information to absorb in a gallery visit, or even in several, and there are 4 canvases playing with words and numbers that don't bother to inform the viewer at all. On the one hand, a harsh political documentary on domestic terrorism, and on the other, a fantasy with merely nominal references to the real world where terrorists operate. And you begin to suspect that the abex look of the canvas is deceiving. Isn't abstract expressionism supposed to be all about the artist's interiority? A vehicle for his, and rarely her, existential angst, a narcissistic demand for recognition thrown at the world. You have read enough of the posters by now to realize that this is not what the show is about. Could it be that the abex look of McClellan's paintings is a disguise, a foil, an alibi? Is she not quoting abex as a generic style, the better to subvert and criticize it, to undermine it with irony? Are the paintings, after all, not as conceptual and political as the posters, but in a tortuous way, in that their criticality is turned against themselves, against the medium of painting, and against the myth of the painter's sovereign subjectivity? You soon realize you would be on the wrong track if you followed that hunch. There is not a trace of irony in the paintings, not a hint of second-degree art-making, none of that distancing, thanks to which clever painters today have their painterly cake and eat it critically too. The canvases are perhaps not abstract expressionist, if the word expressionism should be reserved for the public projection of a private, navel-gazing subjectivity. But they are definitely expressive. And how? Straightforwardly, unapologetically expressive. And what they express is Suzanne McClellan's tormented feelings and existential angst. Only that angst and those feelings are not sui generis and self-centered. The canvases are much too extroverted and centrifugal to allow such a reading. McClellan's tormented feelings come from elsewhere and are directed elsewhere. What's more, they are systematically mediated by language. Nothing demonstrates better that her expressionism is conceptual and her conceptualism expressive than the internal sensations series included in her first show at Team, together with the ideal proportion series. Whereas, according to the cliché, ab-ex painters project onto the canvas proprioceptive sensations in a supposedly raw, pre-linguistic state, McClellan writes on the canvas the words used to express those sensations, imbued with them. So do words such as yearn here, or brood here, literally portray the concepts of yearning or brooding. Contrary to what happens in the internal sensations series, the feelings and sensations expressed in the domestic terrorist series are not internal in the sense of endogenous. They bear the imprint of external causes. There is panic and fear in domestic terrorist Shakur, NCIC, W220, etc. And there is revolt and anger in domestic terrorist Kirkau, NCIC, W333, etc. A painting where the matriculation number of Catherine Mary Kirkau literally screams at you. And there is speed in both. Speed standing for haste and urgency. The mood varies tremendously from one painting to the next in the series. Here, Borup, this one and the next two not in the show. But on the whole, that mood is somber, even when the canvas is not. Here, Duke. Broody, pessimistic, and inhabited by an exacerbated sense of danger and emergency. Here, Dibby. McClellan's angst has not been poured on the canvas to call attention to itself or to the subject who experienced it. The subjects of the paintings are the 7 domestic terrorists on the run. You still know nothing about them. So far, the words and numbers are mute. And you don't know either what exactly caused McClellan's angst. Is it the fugitives? Is it terrorism in general? Or is it the terror of having to live in a society so anxious about terrorism that security trumps liberty everywhere? Call with Information is a demanding exhibition. First, it put the serious viewer in front of the dilemma of whether to read the posters or to focus on the paintings. Then it prompted questions as to the conceptual or the expressive nature of the artist's practice. In the process, it made you reflect critically on the current orthodoxy that has created such an opposition by pitting the good conceptualists, intellectually and politically conscious, against the bad expressionists, romantic, instinctive, and ignorant of the outer world. As if the outer world had not entered paintings such as de Kooning's Gotham News. As if Motherwell had never painted elegies to the Spanish Republic. As if existentialism and abstract expressionism had not been responses to politically dark times. And as if our own times were so rosy that the revival of existentialism and abstract expressionism should be called nostalgic and regressive in the face of post-conceptual practices. You are still pondering on all this when you notice that you have not yet addressed the photos and the works on paper affixed to both walls of posters. Will they furnish the mediating ground, allowing you to solve the dilemmas and contradictions you have encountered so far? Not quite, but they are, so to speak, the trailer to the second room. And in that room, behind the partition, things do indeed come together. At first sight, however, they do anything but. The walls are sheer chaos. Why these clusters of overlapping images pinned to the wall as if on a bulletin board? And why all of a sudden a little image alone in the middle of a wide expanse of unoccupied wall space? What unifies the room in the strangest of ways, because it catches your eye and hits you in the face, is the shrill pink color of a number of elements in that chaos. It is as if Warhol had visited Schwitter's Merzbau and spattered it with dayglow. Upon closer inspection, that pink proves to be played out on a gamut of nuances that goes from orange reddish to pink bluish, with fluorescent pigment thrown in only at the bluish end of the spectrum to produce what I call rose froid, cool or cold pink. It's a color as antagonistic to the ab-ex idiom as imaginable. The color of nylon socks and underwear sold at a discount on open-air markets in the third world. The cheapest, most unromantic color you can get. But when that pink blends with warmer hues of rose, as it does in some of the images in the room, it carries the taste of raspberries and the sense of cardamom and saffron and the lushness of Indian saris and memories of the walls of Jaipur, the pink city of Rajasthan. That luscious pink is sheer aesthetic pleasure. And it's not even spoiled when you discover that it is background to the FBI wanted posters that would have put a face on the oh so abstract portraits in the first room, if only the artist had not deliberately left her viewers clueless. The second room is about the clues to the first. I say about the clues because it alludes to the clues in a whimsical roundabout fashion. It doesn't deliver them straight away in the documentary conceptual manner of the posters. Suzanne McClelland must have had fun mixing them, practicing cut-ups a la Brian Gysin on the FBI posters, see the left part of the image, answering the rubric aliases with hair or eye color, see the lower right corner, or the rubric eye color with lesbian queens, a little down the middle in the column on the left. Actually, that column and others is a result of her having subcontracted the cut-ups to her poet sister, Heather McClelland. Her fun and pleasure, which are palpable in this room, are rooted in collaboration, in particular with women accomplices from her family or from Dieudonné, the non-profit institution dedicated to the collaborative creation of hand papermaking, where she produced the works in this room with the help of Amy Jacobs. Fun and sheer aesthetic pleasure don't, for all that, forbid disturbing pieces of information to come across if you pay close attention. Just read the newspaper headline on top of this image. When plane hits tower. It predates 9/11 by many years. Does that bad omen spoil the sensuous mix of pinks in the lower part? No. Does it put the pressure on you, enjoining you not to shut your eyes on the violence of the world in order to preserve the comfort of your aesthetic experience? Yes. Does it tell you how to resolve the contradiction? No. If you want to have your painterly cake and eat it critically too, that's up to you. The artist is not going to make things easier for you. But she tells you of her mood, her feelings, her various states of mind in the face of domestic terrorism. What I think this room puts forward is the dynamic antidote to the dark, brooding mood of the paintings in the first room. As much as pessimism and angst oozed from those, an almost manic elation and proactive energy emanate from the wall pieces in the second room. In homage to Rauschenberg's combined paintings, I'd like to call them combined collages or combined assemblages. They are technically so diverse that they defy description. Let's just say that they involve various techniques for making paper from cotton rags, linen cloths, or recycled paper pulp, in thicknesses ranging from cigarette paper to pulpy crepes, and various printing techniques ranging from photocopy to silkscreen, not to mention the lackadaisical dropping of a cutout text into the pulp before it is put under a press and assumes its quasi-random shape once and for all. Individual items comprise photocopied or dye-transferred surveillance snapshots of people running, abstract sheets of pink brushstrokes, facsimiles of the FBI wanted posters on very thin light blue paper, screens of nylon wire mesh, helter-skelter collages from the material found on the FBA website, and more. They are organized and displayed on the walls of the room in 7 clusters so that all 7 domestic terrorists the FBI is chasing are given their dues. Each cluster spreads on the wall the content of one portfolio, preserved in a huge cardboard folder. And each portfolio is dedicated to one of the 7 domestic terrorists. Full-fledged portraits, I wouldn't say, but a differentiated, ambiguous tribute, yes, perhaps. Shall I call it repulsive, attractive? Although McClellan swears she didn't choose her favorite domestic terrorists, they were wanted by the FBI, not by her, she confesses how flabbergasted and perhaps secretly happy she was to discover that the bulk of the domestic terrorists still at large were ultra-leftist in persuasion, whereas the ones listed on her poster were all ultra-rightist. Catherine Mary Kirkhope was a Black Panther who hijacked a plane and got political asylum in Algeria. Chezimar, alias Shakur, was a member of the Black Liberation Army who escaped from prison and eventually settled in Cuba. Donna Joan Borup was an anti-apartheid militant and a member of a Marxist-Leninist group known as the May 19th Communist Organization, quote, which advocated communism and the violent overthrow of the United States government, end of quote, as her FBI wanted poster puts it. Elizabeth Anna Duke belonged to the same organization. Arrested in May 1985 for her alleged participation in this group, she was released on bail and fled. She has been a fugitive since October 1985. Josephine Sunshine Overacre is a more ambiguous case, as is Joseph Mahmoud Dibi. Both allegedly belong to the Earth Liberation Front or to the Animal Liberation Front, causes that are often defended with left-wing rhetorics while rooted in right-wing fundamentalist deep ecology. As for the motivations of Leo Frederick Bird, they are politically unfathomable. The FBI apparently doesn't know why he blew up a building on the campus of the University of Wisconsin in 1970. And that is another, not the least intriguing feature of most of the 7 domestic terrorists who are McClelland's subjects. Their crimes go back as far as the 70s. And their convictions, the artist calls them beliefs bigger than themselves, reach even further back to the revolutionary fervor of the 60s. Why the FBI reserves the appellation domestic terrorists to them, whereas there must be far more criminals in the ultra-rightist camp who are still at large, is one of the unanswered questions that propelled Suzanne McClelland to research those 7 lost souls and to pay them an ambiguous tribute fraught with her secret sympathies. However unpardonable their acts, they were, the artist says, out to rescue something. Secret and not so secret sympathies must, I think, come into the open before I pick up the question of the conference that I was at. When is art political? I strongly doubt that the organizers had the likes of Arno Breker or Leni Riefenstahl in mind when they chose that question. Yet, if ever there were political artists, it was those two. And to reach further into the past, if Rigaud was not political when he painted the portrait of Louis XIV, then what was he? It seems to go without saying here in this assembly, I mean the assembly of the conference in Los Angeles a couple of days ago, that political art means politically progressive art. That assumption should not go unexamined if we want to question when is art political to have transhistorical validity. But I'll go along with it, provided its bias is clearly affirmed. There are, I believe, good reasons to maintain that when art deserves to be called political, in a normative sense that doesn't apply to Rigaud's portrait of Louis XIV or to Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, it can only be an art that carries aspirations to freedom, equality, justice, and emancipation. Let that rest assured. By raising the when questions, the organizers were smart enough to disqualify the theory, actually quite typical of the 60s and 70s, that art is always political, especially when it claims not to be. That belief was part of the everything is political motto that has brought politics into the classroom and the bedroom, and that treated every protest of innocence as a disavowal. It had its time, and its time is over. Next, there is the issue of generality. When is art in general, political? I don't want to dodge the issue. The claim to general validity of theoretical questions is legitimate. But I find myself unable to underwrite that claim because, in art, there is no generality that doesn't rest on the singularity of aesthetic experience. And there is no aesthetic experience except of singular works of art. So, rather than when is art political, let me ask, when is Suzanne McClelland's art political? An immediate answer offers itself. Not always. The Ideal Proportions series of paintings is perhaps political if you have decided a priori that replacing the figurative likeness of someone with a numerical profile is inherently political, either because it refuses the idealization of the body à la Arno Breker, or because it makes fun of a former governor of California whose politics you abhor. And the Internal Sensations series is definitely not political, unless you are convinced a priori that imprinting the linguistic turn of conceptual art on abstract expressionism and or criticizing the disembodied abstractness of conceptual art by making words expressive are intrinsically political gestures. Such a priori convictions look like postulates to me, ideological postulates resting on and leading to a circular reasoning that blindly reinforces itself and never encounters the test of reality. I think it makes a lot of sense to maintain that Call with Information is a body of work that makes an unambiguous claim to the status of political art, whereas Internal Sensations makes no such claim. I could adduce many arguments in favor of my thesis. They all boil down to stressing the adequacy of the overtly political subject matter of the Call with Information show with its form, its mode of presentation, its aesthetic embodiment, and its address to the viewer. The way the documentary style of the posters, the expressivity of the paintings and works on paper, here one of the sheets from the Overacre portfolio affixed to the wall of posters, and the playful abruptness of the combined collages interact, the way they interact and clash against each other, seems to me an adequate expression of the mixed feelings and critical reflections which domestic terrorism from left and right has inspired Suzanne McClelland. Nothing in that show indicates that she might condone terrorism, but nothing betrays moralizing judgment either, not even on the racist hate crimes listed on the posters. Is that a problem? Given the identification of political art with politically progressive art? I already hear voices clamoring that she aestheticized the politics of terrorists. Implied by that old Benjaminian saw is that she made terrorism from left or right palatable by treating it as the subject matter of aesthetic decisions. Sure, she made aesthetic decisions about a repulsive subject matter, just as Goya in El Tres de Mayo or Picasso in Guernica. Whether she has made that repulsive subject matter palatable is for the viewer to decide. For me, she has not. So, when is Suzanne McClelland's art political? If you answer as I do, not always, if you decide that Call with Information is political art, whereas Internal Sensations is not, then you are bound to be slightly dissatisfied with the way the question of this conference that I was at is phrased. In the brief statement printed on the folder, the organizers, Arne de Boever and Michael Kelly, announced their intentions of, quote, leaving the quest for an essence of political art aside in order to inquire instead into the ever-changing conditions that make art political, end of quote. Clear enough. The question, when is art political, replaces the question, what is political art? I was struck by the resemblance between this move and that of Nelson Goodman, who famously replaced the question, what is art, with the question, when is art? One of Goodman's motivations was that the ontological question had apparently been disqualified by works of art such as Duchamp's ready-mades. A bottle rack is not always art. It functions as a bottle rack when it dries bottles in the wine cellar, and it functions as art when it is presented as such in a museum. Does this time-dependent or space-dependent change of function apply to Suzanne McClelland's work? I think it's very far-fetched, but not totally absurd, to say that the various photos, silk screens, sheets of handmade paper and cut-ups from the FBI wanted posters that compose the portrait of one domestic terrorist function as art when they are displayed on the walls of the team gallery, and cease to function as art when they are packed away in their portfolio box. But I think it's far-fetched. And it is less far-fetched and perhaps less absurd to say that the posters function as sheer political information when you read the small print, and as art when you take in from a distance their obsessive repetition on the wall that is facing you as you enter the gallery. But I am not satisfied with such answers. To make a comparison that I think is relevant, Rembrandt's anatomy lesson doesn't cease to be art when it is shown as a document in a didactic exhibition on the history of surgery. What happens is that in the art museum, it is shown both as art and in the name of art. That is, in the name of aesthetic comparability with other art. And that in the exhibition on the history of surgery, it is still shown as art, but in the name of didactic documentary enlightenment. The body of work McClelland entitled Call with Information was shown at the Team Gallery as art, and I say as political art, in the name of art, period. Not in the name of political art, let alone in the name of politics. The counter-evidence is provided by the fate of a work that inspired McClelland for Call with Information, Andy Warhol's 13 Most Wanted Men. Commissioned for the New York State Pavilion at the 1964 World Fair, in order to be installed outdoors on the circular wall of the pavilion, it was censored and painted over with silver paint when Governor Nelson Rockefeller expressed his concern that the images, mostly depicting men of Italian descent, would be insulting to an important segment of his electorate. Whether Warhol's Most Wanted Men was political art is debatable. The pun on wanted makes the work political from the point of view of queer theory, and by the same token makes it apolitical with regard to, say, a critique of the penitentiary system. But the work was clearly made as art, was meant to be shown in the name of art, and was unshown in the name of politics. It never stopped being art. Rockefeller didn't dispute that it was art. He wasn't even concerned with its possible political content. He censored it in the name of politics as usual, i.e., electoral calculation. Warhol's Most Wanted Men is, I believe, exemplary in that it shows where the when question is relevant, in the distinction to be made between art as art and art in the name of art. But the when question cannot replace ontological questions. These are unavoidable and much too complex to be broached here. For lack of a satisfying response to the questions, what is art and what is politics, the question, what is political art, will have to wait. Thank you very much.